Are there any aspects of the bill which you find unacceptable, and if so, what are they, and perhaps you could give us reasons behind that? Perhaps you could lead in this one, Mr Greatorex.
Sure. I think the a main concern for us in the bill is an underestimation of the seriousness of oral sex. As has been mentioned, certain sexual activities will be criminal, but activities such as oral sex will not be criminal under the bill. And we feel, when we're talking about child protection and welfare, we must consider how serious oral sex can be, the fact that sexually transmitted infections can be transferred through oral sex. And therefore, as Arthur Stevenson was talking about drawing lines in the sand, we would feel that this particular line has been drawn in the wrong place. We would like to see the law applying to oral sex to indicate, again, society's disapproval of that conduct.
Gentlemen, I just wonder what your own views are in respect of the role that the criminal law plays in regulating sexual behaviour between young people.
I think we'll come back to our answer to the first question. It's primarily a protective role. It's to prevent harm, act as a deterrent, and specifically where there is harm or predatory behaviour in particular, then to act as a mechanism, I think, for intervention, so that that behaviour can be addressed by the appropriate authorities, whether it be police or social services or whoever.
Yes, I think the policy memorandum, again, paragraph 113, acknowledges the importance of the criminal law in guiding young people's behaviour, and where that is true of full sexual activity, we also believe it's true of oral sex. We don't want the message to be sent. I do think that the message sending role of the law is important in this area, not least the fact that if any hint of watering down of the law is given, then it will be taken as that, as a weakening of the law in this area. I don't think we want to encourage any form of sexual activity underage by weakening the law or giving the impression that the law has been weakened. So I'd see the criminal law as an important indicator of society's view, and the ability, we believe that the law should be there, have the ability, the capacity to intervene in the most serious cases, while of course we acknowledge that discretion will be exercised in many cases. But to have the law totally disapplied in this area, and therefore leaving it unable to interfere, is not a step we would condone. We think the law should have the scope to interfere in the most serious cases.
So, can I just ask Mr Greatorex, are you suggesting that young people, in terms of when they're engaging in sexual behaviour, think about the law, and if the current laws that are available, and say, well, I shouldn't engage in sexual behaviour because there's a possibility of me being brought before the court?
I think the deterrent effect of the law will apply to some, not perhaps everybody. I don't think the law deters everybody. I mean, the very fact that 30% engage in sexual activity indicates that it's not a deterrent to all. But I think of that 70%, some at least will be deterred by the law. And we also found it very interesting what Children First found in their small study, that children were using the 16, the age of consent, as a buffer. It was described as almost an excuse, a prop for them not to consent to sexual activity, and therefore we see that as an important area that shows that young people are considering the law in this area.
Can I also ask, gentlemen, in terms of where the bill draws a distinction between younger children and older children, what views you have in that respect?
Well, we wouldn't draw that distinction because essentially we would argue that 16 is the appropriate age in terms of sexual intercourse.
Okay. Mr Greatorex?
Yeah, I would agree with that 16 is the correct age. And yeah, we wouldn't like to see the law watered down. for children. We believe that under 16s are still children. I think we acknowledge the reasoning for that line drawing because of we say that those under 13 have no capacity and those over 13 but under 16 have limited capacity. Yet we still consider that those under 16 are vulnerable, they require protection, and they don't have the necessary capacity to consent to the types of activities that we're talking about when we're describing sexual activities.
I think I know this isn't the Health Committee, but from a purely health point of view, the earlier people engage in sexual activity, the more health risks there are. And certainly in terms of cervical cancer, that's the case. So I think the age between 13 and 16 is a crucial age, actually, where we should be seeking, through various mechanisms, not just through the criminal law, because at the end of the day, the criminal law is not going to, on its own, solve this problem. But through various mechanisms, we need to seek to encourage young people not to engage in sexual activity at that age.
Thank you. Cathy Craigie.
Thank you, Convener. In the submission, particularly from the Christian Institute, they say that the law should prohibit any sexual activity below 16. Are there any risks associated with the criminalisation of sexual conduct between older children, in your opinion?
I know, obviously, one of the concerns that's often raised in this area is that children will be criminalised for kissing if you have a broad definition. But I would say that that's exactly the area where discretion is important, and there's a room for common sense. So that's why we said all sexual activity, because we believe that there can be a discretion, but by having that provision, you're able to intervene even in those circumstances where it's not full sexual activity.
Okay. The Church of Scotland, in their written evidence and in their oral evidence this morning, were clear in saying that they see this as a welfare issue, and that the law should be written in an appropriate way and not a law that is never enforced in a way to put sort of words in their mouth a bit. Do you think that the law is brought into disrepute if the legislation is passed in a way that is not intended to be enforced?
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know. Because there are many roles to the law, and it doesn't undermine the message-sending role of the law that it's not going to be necessarily prosecuted in every case, because the society's standard is still set there clearly, and there are those that will benefit from that by being deterred or by being able to say no, as we learned from the Children First, and was also reflected, if I may say, in England and Wales when they were considering sex offences in 2003. Similar findings were made there that children were able to use the age of consent as a prop, not to engage in sexual activity when they weren't really willing to. I think peer pressure is very important in this area, and any assistance we can give children to resist the pressure they're put under by the coverage in the media and perhaps their peers is important. And the criminal law, by expressing the seriousness of the activities, does that.